Ellipsis here or there we have discerned writing, a non-symmetrical division designated on the one hand the CLO shore of the hook, and on the other the opening of the text. On the one hand the theological encyclopedia and, modeled upon it, the hook of man. On the other a fabric of traces marking the disappearance of an ex-seed god or of an erased man. The question of writing could he opened only if the book was closed. The joyous wandering of the grapevine then became wandering without return. The opening into the text was adventure, expenditure without reserve. And yet did we not know that the closure of the book was not a simple limit among others? And that only in the book, coming back to it unceasingly, drawing all our resources from it, could we indefinitely designate the writing beyond the book? Which brings us to consider El Retour au Livre 1, the return to the book. Under this heading, Edmond Yaz first tells us what it is to abandon the book if closure is not end, we protest or deconstruct in vain, God succeeds God and the book succeeds the book. But within this movement of succession, writing keeps its vigil, between God and God, between the book and the book. And if writing takes shape on the basis of both this vigil and the beyond of the closure, then the return to the book does not enclose us within the book. The return is a moment of wandering, it repeats the epoch of the book, its totality suspended between two forms of writing, its withdrawal and that which is reserved within it. A book which is the interfacing of a risk. My life, from the book on, will have been a vigil of writing in the interval of limits. Repetition does not reissue the book but describes its origin from the vantage of a writing which does not yet belong to it, or no longer belongs to it, a writing which feigns, by repeating the book, inclusion in the book. Far from letting itself be oppressed or enveloped within the volume, this repetition is the first writing. The writing of the origin, the writing that retraces the origin, tracking down the signs of its disappearance, the lost writing of the origin. To write is to have the passion of the origin. But what disposes it in this way, we now know, is not the origin, but that which takes its place, which is not, moreover, the opposite of an origin. It is not absence instead of presence, but a trace which replaces a presence which has never been present, an origin by means of which nothing has begun. Now, the book has lived on this lure, to have given us to believe that passion, having originally been impassioned by something, could in the end be appeased by the return of that something. Lure of the origin, the end, the line, the ring, the volume, the center. As in the first book of questions, imaginary rabbis answer each other, in the song on the ring. The line is the lure received one of my greatest anxieties, said _Agam, was to see, without being able to stop it, my life curve itself to form a ring. Once the circle turns, once the volume rolls itself up, once the book is repeated, its identification with itself gathers an imperceptible difference which permits us efficaciously, rigorously, that is, discreetly, to exit from closure. In redoubling the closure of the book, one cuts it in half. One then furtively escapes from it, between two passageways through the same book, the same line, along the same ring, vigil of writing in the interval of limits. This exit from the identical into the same two remains very slight, weighs nothing itself, thinks and weighs the book as such. The return to the book is then the abandoning of the book, it has slipped in between God and God, the book, in the neutral space of succession, in the suspense of the interval. The return, at this point, does not retake possession of something. It does not reappropriate the origin. The latter is no longer in itself. Writing, passion of the origin, must also be understood through the subjective genitive. It is the origin itself which is impassioned, passive, and past, in that it is written. Which means inscribed. The inscription of the origin is doubtless its being as writing, but it is also its being as inscribed in a system in which it is only a function and a locus. Thus understood, the return to the book is of an elliptical essence. Something invisible is missing in the grammar of this repetition. As this lack is invisible and undeterminable, as it completely redoubles and consecrates the book, once more passing through each point along its circuit, nothing has budged. And yet all meaning is altered by this lack. Repeated, the same line is no longer exactly the same, the ring no longer has exactly the same center, the origin has played. Something is missing that would make the circle perfect. But within the ellipsis, by means of simple redoubling of the root, the solicitation of closure, and the jointing of the line, the book has let itself be thought as such. Anyukal said, the circle is acknowledged. Break the curve. The root doubles the root. The book consecrates the book. The return to the book here announces the form of the eternal return. 3. The return of the same does not alter itself but does so absolutely except by amounting to the same. Pure repetition, were it to change neither thing nor sign, carries with it an unlimited power of perversion and subversion. This repetition is writing because what disappears in it is the self-identity of the origin, the self-presence of so-called jibing speech. That is the center. The first book, the mythic book, the E prior to all repetition, has lived on the deception that the center was sheltered from play, irreplaceable, withdrawn from metaphor and metonymy, a kind of invariable first name that could be invoked, but not repeated. The center of the first book should not have been repeatable in its own representation. Once it lends itself a single time to such a representation, that is to say, once it is written when one can read a book in the book, an origin in the origin, a center in the center, it is the abyss, is the bottomlessness of infinite redoubling. The other is in the same, the elsewhere within. The center is the well. Where is the center? Screamed Reb Matties. The scorned water permits the falcon to pursue his prey. The center, perhaps, is the displacement of the question. No center there where the circle is impossible. May my death come from myself, said Reb Bikri. For I would then be, all at once, both the servitude of the ring and the caesura. As soon as a sign emerges, it begins by repeating itself. Without this, it would not be a sign, would not be what it is, that is to say, the non-self identity which regularly refers to the same. That is to say, to another sign, which itself will be born of having been divided. The grapheme, repeating itself in this fashion, thus has neither natural side nor natural center. But did it ever lose them? Is its eccentricity a descentering? C. L and one not affirm the non-referral to the center, rather than bemoan the absence of the center? Why would one mourn for the center? Is not the center, the absence of play and difference, another name for death? The death which reassures and appeases, but also, with 'tis whole, creates anguish and puts at stake. The passage through negative eccentricity is doubtless necessary, but only liminary. The center is the threshold. Reb Naman said, God is the center, this is why great minds have proclaimed that he did not exist, for if the center of an apple or the star is the heart of the heavenly body or of the fruit, which is the true middle of the orchard and the night? Anyukal said, the center is failure. Where is the center? Oust center. Under ashes. Sous la cendre resila, the center is mourning. Just as there is a negative theology, there is a negative atheology. An AC complice of the former, it still pronounces the absence of a center, when it is play that should be affirmed. But is not the desire for a center, as a function of play itself, the indestructible itself? And in the repetition or return of play, how could the phantom of the center not call to us? It is here that the hesitation between writing as dissentering and writing as an affirmation of play is infinite. This hesitation is part of play and links it to death. Hesitation occurs within a who knows, without subject or knowledge. The last obstacle, the ultimate limit is, who knows? The center. For then everything comes to us from the end of the night, from childhood. If the center is indeed the displacing of the question, it is because the unnameable bottomless well whose sign the center was, has always been surnamed, the center as the sign of a hole that the book attempted to fill. The center was the name of a hole, and the name of man, like the name of God, pronounces the force of that which has been raised up in the hole in order to operate as a work in the form of a book. The volume, the scroll of parchment, was to have insinuated itself into the dangerous hole, was to have furtively penetrated into the menacing dwelling place with an animal like, quick, silent, smooth, brilliant, sliding emotion, in the fashion of a serpent or a fish. Such is the anxious desire of the book. It is tenacious too, and parasitic, loving and breathing through 1,000 mouths that leave 1,000 imprints on our skin, a marine monster, a polyp. Ridiculous, this position on your belly. You are crawling. You are boring a hole through the wall at its base. You hope to escape, like a rat. Like shadows, in the morning, on a road. And this will to stand upright, despite fatigue and hunger? A hole, it was only a hole, the chance for a book. A hail octopus, your work? Untrue however, ton over. The octopus was hung from the ceiling and his tentacles began to sparkle. It was only a hole in the wall so narrow that you never could have gotten into it to flee. Beware of dwellings. They are not always hospitable. The strange serenity of such a return. Rendered hopeless by repetition, and yet joyous for having affirmed the abyss, for having inhabited the labyrinth as a poet, for having written the hole, the chance for a book into which one can only plunge, and that one must maintain while destroying it. The dwelling is inhospitable because it seduces us, as does the book, into a labyrinth. The labyrinth, here is an abyss, we plunge into the horizontally of a pure surface, which itself represents itself from detour to detour. The book is the labyrinth. You think you have left it, you are plunged into it. You have no chance to get away. You must destroy the work. You cannot resolve yourself to do so. I notice the slow but sure rise of your anguish. Wall after wall. Who waits for you at the end? No one. Your name has folded over on itself. Like the hand on the white arm. In the serenity of this third volume, the book of questions is fulfilled. Fulfilled as it should be, by remaining open, by pronouncing non-closure, simultaneously infinitely open and infinitely reflecting on itself, an eye in an eye, a commentary infinitely accompanying the book of the rejected and called for a book, the book ceaselessly begun and taken up again on a side which is neither in the book nor outside it, articulating itself as the very opening which is reflection without exit, referral, return, and detour of the labyrinth. The latter is a way which encloses in itself the ways out of itself, which includes its own exits, which itself opens its own doors, that is to say, opening them onto itself, closes itself by thinking its own opening. This contradiction is thought as such in the third book of questions. This is why triplicity is its figure and the key to its serenity. To its composition, too, the third book says, I am the first book in the second. And Euclid said, 3 questions have seduced the book and 3 questions will finish it. That which ends 3 times begins. The book is 3. The world is 3 and God, for man, the 3 answers. 3, not because the equivocally, the duplicity of everything and nothing, of absent presence, of the black sun, of the open ring, of the eluded center, of the elliptical return, finally would be summarized and reduced in some dialectic, in some conciliating final term. The pot and the pact of which Euclid speaks at midnight or the third question, are another name for the death affirmed since dawn or the first question, and Euclid said, the book has led me from dawn to twilight, from death to death, and midday, or the second question. With your shadow avec ton ombre, within the 11 umbe 1 dans le nombre, at the end of my questions, at the foot of the 3 questions. Sarah, ye one cal, death is at the dawn because everything has begun with repetition. Once the center or the origin have begun by repeating themselves, by redoubling themselves, the double did not only add itself to the simple. It divided it and supplemented it. There was immediately a double origin plus its repetition. 3 is the first figure of repetition. The last 2, for the abyss of representation always remains dominated by its rhythm, infinitely. The infinite is doubtless neither one, nor empty, nor innumerable. It is of a ternary essence. 2, like the second book of questions, he book of Euclid, like Euclid, remains the indispensable and useless articulator of the book, the sacrificed mediator without which triplicity would not be, and without which meaning would not be what it is, that is to say, different from itself, in play, at stake. To articulate is to joint. One could say of the second book what is said of Euclid in the second part of their turn to the book, he was Liana and Learn in the book, before being expelled from it. If nothing has preceded repetition, if no present has kept watch over the trace, if, after a fashion, it is the void which ream-ties itself and marks itself with imprints, for then the time of writing no longer follows the line of modified present tenses. What is to come is not a future present, yesterday is not a past present. The beyond of the closure of the book is neither to be awaited nor to be refound. It is there, but out there, beyond, within repetition, but eluding us there. It is there like the shadow of the book, the third party between the hands holding the book, the deferral within the now of writing, the distance between the book and the book, that other hand. Opening the third part of the third book of questions, thus begins the song on distance and accent, tomorrow is the shadow and reflexibility of our hands. Reb Derrida.